Interpretation. The Bishop of Noyon was not a harmless man. His conceit had made him think his power had no limits. He was grossly unaware of the offense he had given to so many people, but no one could confront him or bring his behavior to his attention. The abbé hit upon the only real way to bring such a man down. Had his parody been too obvious, it would not have been very entertaining, and the bishop, its poor victim, would have won sympathy. By making it devilishly subtle, and making the bishop complicit in it as well, de Caumartin both entertained the court, always important, and let Noyon dig his own grave with his reaction, from the heights of vanity to the depths of humiliation and rage. Suddenly aware of how people saw him, the bishop lost his balance, even alienating the king, who had once found his vanity amusing. Finally, he had to absent himself from court, to many people's relief. The worst colleagues and comrades are often the ones with inflated egos, who think everything they do is right and worthy of praise. Subtle mockery and disguised parody are brilliant ways of one-upping these types. You seem to be complimenting them, your style or ideas even imitating theirs, but the praise has a sting in its tail. Are you imitating them to poke fun at them? Does your praise hide criticism? These questions get under their skin, making them vaguely insecure about themselves. Maybe you think they have faults, and maybe that opinion is widely shared. You have disturbed their high sense of self, and they will tend to respond by overreacting and overplaying their hand. This strategy works particularly well on those who fancy themselves powerful intellectuals and who are impossible to best in any kind of argument. By quoting their words and ideas back at them in slightly grotesque form, you neutralize their verbal strengths and leave them self-doubting and insecure. 3. Toward the middle of the 16th century, a young samurai, whose name history has left behind, developed a novel way of fighting. He could wield two swords with equal dexterity in his right and left hands at the same time. This technique was formidable, and he was eager to use it to make a name for himself. So he decided to challenge the most famous swordsman of his time, Tsukahara Bokuden, to a duel. Bokuden was now middle-aged and in semi-retirement. He answered the young man's challenge with a letter. A samurai who could use a sword in his left hand with the same effectiveness as his right had an unfair advantage. The young swordsman could not understand what he meant. "If you think my using a sword with my left is unfair," he wrote back, "renounce the match." Instead, Bokuden sent off 10 more letters, each repeating, in slightly different words, the charge about the left hand. Each letter only made the challenger more annoyed. Finally, however, Bokuden agreed to fight. The young samurai was used to fighting on instinct and with great speed, but as the duel began, he could not stop thinking about his left hand and Bokuden's fear of it. With his left hand, he found himself calculating, he would stab here, slash there. His left hand could not fail. It seemed possessed of its own power. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Bokuden's sword cut deeply across the challenger's right arm. The duel was over. The young samurai recovered physically, but his mind was forever unhinged. He could not fight by instinct anymore. He thought too much, and he soon gave up the sword. In 1605, Genzaemon, head of the renowned Yoshioka family of Kyoto swordsmen, received the strangest challenge of his life. An unknown 21-year-old samurai named Miyamoto Musashi, dressed like a beggar in dirty, ragged clothes, challenged him to a duel so haughtily that Musashi must have thought himself the more famous swordsman. Genzaemon did not feel he had to pay attention to this youth. A man as illustrious as he could not go through life accepting challenges from every bumpkin who crossed his path. Yet something about Musashi's arrogance got under his skin. Genzaemon would enjoy teaching this youth a lesson. The duel was set for 5 o'clock the following morning in a suburban field. Genzaemon arrived at the appointed time, accompanied by his students. Musashi was not there. Minutes turned into an hour. The young man had probably gotten cold feet and skipped town. Genzaemon sent a student to look for the young samurai at the inn where he was staying. The student soon returned. Musashi, he reported, had been asleep when he arrived, and when awakened, had rather impertinently ordered him to send Genzaemon his regards and say he would be there shortly. Genzaemon was furious and began to pace the field, and Musashi still took his time. It was 2 more hours before he appeared in the distance, sauntering toward them across the field. He was wearing, too, a scarlet headband, not the traditional white headband that Genzaemon wore. Genzaemon shouted angrily at Musashi and charged forward, impatient to have done with this irritating boor. But Musashi, looking almost bored, parried one blow after another. Each man was able to slash at the other's forehead, but where Genzaemon's white headband turned red with blood, Musashi's stayed the same color. Finally, frustrated and confused, Genzaemon charged forward yet again, right into Musashi's sword, which struck his head and knocked him to the ground unconscious. Genzaemon would later recover, but he was so humiliated by his defeat that he left the world of swordsmanship and entered the priesthood, where he would spend his remaining years. Interpretation. For a samurai, losing a duel could mean death or public humiliation. Swordsmen sought out any advantage, physical dexterity, a superior sword, the perfect technique, to avoid that fate. But the greatest samurais, the Bokudens and Musashis, sought their advantage in being able to subtly push the opponent off his game, messing with his mind. They might try to make him self-conscious, a little too aware of his technique and style, a deadly trap for anyone who must react in the moment. They might trick him into focusing on the wrong thing, the left hand, the scarlet headband. Particularly with conventional-minded opponents, they might show up late, sparking a frustration that would upset their timing and concentration. In all of these cases, a change in the enemy's focus or mood would lead to a mistake. To try to repair this mistake in the heat of the moment would lead to another, until the one-upped fighter might literally walk into the other man's sword. Understand, what will yield the greatest effects in the game of one-upmanship is a subtle disturbance in your opponent's mood and mindset. Be too direct, make an insulting comment, an obvious threat, and you wake them to the danger you represent. Stir their competitive juices. Bring out the best in them. Instead, you want to bring out the worst. A subtle comment that makes them self-conscious and gets under their skin will turn them inward, get them lost in the labyrinth of their own thoughts. A seemingly innocent action that stirs an emotion like frustration, anger, or impatience will equally cloud their vision. In both cases, they will tend to misfire and start making mistakes. This works particularly well against rivals who must perform in some way. Deliver a speech, say, or present a project. The fixating thought or bad emotion you create in them makes them lose touch with the moment and messes up their timing. Do this right, too, and no one will be aware of your involvement in the bad performance, not even the rival you have one-upped. 4. In January 1988, Senator Robert Dole of Kansas could smell victory in his quest to become President of the United States. His main opponent for the Republican nomination was George H.W. Bush, the incumbent vice president in the administration of Ronald Reagan. In the Iowa caucuses, the first test in the primary season, Bush had been lackluster and had finished a distant third, behind Dole and televangelist Pat Robertson. Dole's aggressive campaigning had won him much attention. He had the momentum and was clearly the frontrunner. To Dole, however, there was one blemish to his great victory in Iowa. Lee Atwater, Bush's 36-year-old campaign strategist, had spread to the media a story that questioned the integrity of the senator's wife, former Secretary of Transportation Elizabeth Dole. The senator was an elected politician of nearly 3 decades standing and had developed the necessary thick skin, but attacks on his wife, he felt, were beyond the pale. He had a temper that his advisers worked hard to keep under wraps. and when the story broke, he lashed out at reporters, giving Atwater the opportunity to say, he can dish it out, but if someone hits him back, he starts whining. Then Atwater sent Dole a 10-page letter enumerating the many times the Kansas senator had gone negative in the campaign, and this letter, too, made its way into the media. Dole was furious. Despite his victory in Iowa, he could not get over seeing his wife dragged into the dirt. He would get back at the Bush folk and Atwater.